Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. So I think we're just going to kind of get started. I'll go through my code. Right now there's just two of you in here. Kind of what I was expecting with it being 11 a.m. my time, 8 a.m. Pacific. It's early for people. So I'm just kind of on my lunch break right now, taking some time so that I could kind of go through this code. So ideally, it'll be just a quick walkthrough through my code for Project 9. Morning, Christina. Welcome. So I'm just going to kind of go through it. If you guys have questions, try and hit me on the group chat since it looks like none of you have your mics running. I'll keep an eye on that. So we're just going to kind of go through the code, what I did specifically to complete this project. I'll just do a walkthrough. I've already got the code up and running. And then, any questions you have about how I figured out what to do in my code, specific questions about this project, whatever you guys have questions for, I'm fair game. Now, since there's only 3 of you, let's kind of get going as people may or may not come in. They'll just have to catch up. So Project 9 is kind of the capstone for our Android Basic. And, looking at the rubric, you should already have the gist of the inventory, the conceptual design of the database done. You didn't have to have a UI built already, but it didn't hurt to do that with your Project 8. The big goal was working with the database, being able to query it, and then display those results on the activities. So what gets added in Project 9 is we want to add new inventory. We want to look at the details. We want to be able to edit those details and see the list of everything from the main activity. So we get 2 UIs. We get the catalog, and then we get the editor/display. You can do that in the display data in 2 different ways. I've seen a few users do edit is its own activity, but then display data is also its own activity. I believe Olivia did that where you click on the item, it shows you a display of more details, and then from there you can choose to edit it. I did all of it in one, so when you click on an item, it takes you to the edit and shows you all those details. That tends to be the easier option. There's less activities, there's less code that's involved in that. So that's how I managed it. Other than that, we need the sale button, which is what a lot of people have been confused about, how to get that connected up and implemented. And then you just want to have all the checks and balances in your code to make sure that you don't go negative, that you have a button to delete product, that there's a button to then also order from a supplier. And if I remember right, that's really just the bulk of what you need in this second phase of the inventory app. So before I get into the code, let me pull up my emulator. So this was my app. So it's now loading. So it's a gaming catalog, gaming database essentially. And I just did a loading screen to load some of the background data, but also to give the user a few details of, okay, how do you manage this? So right now you see I have no data. There's no data in my database. So this is my blank screen that has no info. the floating action button at the bottom, my toolbar settings. If I choose my settings, I can add dummy data. I add dummy data, it adds an item, and just because I like the frills and animation, I tweaked my my background screen to kind of vanish as items get added. So it added this item, suggested sale price. It tells me what gaming system it's on, tells me how many I have on hand, and I can sell the item. You add more dummy data, adds a new one. Hey, it's on a different system, different quantity, and I did all of this just with some random generators and just a string array to collect a bunch of different details, and then it just randomly assigns one of those. So you can see, you know, different systems. I know Super Smash Bros. Is not on PlayStation 4. I don't build that logic in. I just wanted some basic details. So you see now I have 5 different items on there. I can delete all games. If I hit the sell item, it sells, and now my quantity is 1. And if I sell it again, I get a message at the bottom saying, hey, you're selling the last one. You should probably order some more. Just a heads up that, hey, it's the last one. So I currently have 0 on hand. I can sell the item, and it gives me a toast. You can't sell what you don't have. If you don't have any, you can't sell it to someone else. So this was one of the things that, I currently work at a company where we have inventory and we do inventory, but then I also have ordering software that I work with, and it kind of combined both, and that really confused me at the first. Is why do we have an inventory app where you can sell product? You shouldn't have the two connected. If you're truly developing an inventory, if you don't have any, you don't have any. You shouldn't sell the inventory. You should, but that's all kind of besides. So you see, I cannot sell anymore, but I can sell the other items and vice versa. So if I delete all games, I get a dialog saying, hey, what do you want to do? I want to delete them. Brings me back to the blank, and I have my start screen again. So if I hit my floating button, it just shows a mini menu with 3 options. Inventory stats, which isn't built yet. I can delete all games from here as well as up here, or I can add a blank game. Adding a blank game brings me to this screen. I can manually type in the barcode, so like the ISBN number. I can also click this, which opens a camera intent, and I can scan the barcode, and that sends a JSON or an API query to an API that stores the UPC codes, and then it gives me the name of the system. But let's say I want to add this in, so we're going to say this is Call of Duty 4, whatever. And it's going to be on Xbox One, and I have 8, so my sale price is $12.85. Supplier name, I buy it from Amazon, 1-800-122-3369. That's a real phone number somewhere probably. Email address is optional. So what I did here is you can have either a phone number or an email address. It does the logic in the background to check, is at least one of these filled in? As long as you have one of them, then it's considered a valid game. It doesn't care if you have an email or a phone number, as long as you have one of them. So, but you can put both of them in there. And I'm hoping that this all works. I'm missing something. What am I missing? Think. Okay. I have an older version on here, so I'm just going to add the dummy data again. So if I do a long press on this item, I get an option. I can delete this individual item or I can update it. Updating it takes you in and allows you to edit the details of this particular item. And then your menu allows you to delete the game, save the game. You can back out, but then when I'm in an update, you notice I have a floating button again at the bottom. I can hit the floating button and it gives me the option to call the supplier or email the supplier. That's the intent. So depending on which one of these is filled in, these are clickable dependent on that. So if there's no email address, I can't email the supplier because I don't have that contact. If there's no phone number, I can't obviously call because I don't have that contact. That's why it does the double check at the beginning to look to see which is there, because that logic has to be built somewhere. But other than that, that's really, that is my app. That's how I did it to go through. So now that you've seen kind of how it works or what it does, let's kind of look at the actual code. So first off, you'll notice a little bit of difference probably in your code compared to my code, because I am implementing probably a few dependencies different than what you have. I've switched over to using Google's new material design theme instead of the app compat or the generic that comes with anything on SDK 27 or down. With SDK 28, so Android Pie, you have the ability to implement Android's material design. The material design, there's really great resource for what it can do, but it's ideal if you're going towards developing for cross-platform. Material design is on iOS Swift, it's on Flutter, it's on Android, it's for Windows development. So all of those components use material design, and there are implementations. So you can write one code base, and it's much easier to translate that across to the different platforms because it all has that same theme. That's where a lot of developers get hung up, is on the differences between how you write in Android and how you write in iOS. When you're using the same theme across the board, that change makes a whole lot more sense. So that's why I'm bringing in material design. So you'll notice what you have implemented probably isn't what I have, and some of the import statements will be a little bit different. So just want to touch on that real quick. But I am using Android Oreo now that it's officially a release. As you're developing, you want to try and stay on the latest and greatest versions, and then kind of tweak as you go. So that's my Gradle. That should be all that you need there. My manifest should look exactly like yours. I mean, I have the launcher, the loading activity, just that front circle spinner at the bottom, or at the beginning. I have my catalog. I have my inventory entry, so my add activity, and then it's listed with the parent that takes me back to the catalog. That allows the toolbar menu to go back a screen and take me back to where I was. And then the provider, which is what you need to actually access the database, that should be part of your manifest as well. So you notice there are going to be quite a few basic things in here. It's all the frills and stuff that I like doing. So in my Java class, or in my Java, I have two. So what you would normally see is com.yourname.appname. So I have two coms. So I have com.google.integration. This is the camera integration. That's a completely different library that you can just two classes that you can drop in. I'm happy to explain that more some other way and give you some resources on that if you're interested in the barcode scanning logic. But we want to go into my code. So I have my activities. I have custom objects. So these are specific things that just kind of custom classes. Here's all the files for my database. An on-click interface, which I'll get into in a second. That will make a difference when you see the catalog view. And then my query elements. So this is how I pull from the JSON. I think that's right. Yeah, so this is my when I'm pulling the query for my game data. UPC. So this is my custom class, just to get the UPC code. Yeah, yes. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second. And then just the async task loader. So let's start. Where should we start? Probably my cursor adapter. This seems to be where a lot of the confusion questions come. This is driving me nuts, so I'm going to take the font down just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so in your cursor adapter, now I implemented Recycler View. I'm a big proponent of Recycler. I will, if at any chance I have the ability to do Recycler over List View, I'm going to do it. Recycler View is more powerful. It's more potent. There's just more to it. But it does take some additional implementation to make that happen. But the premise is going to be the same between Recycler View and List View. The concept of taking your cursor, which returns the kind of the database. If you think of it along the lines of how we worked with the news activity. So your cursor is kind of like that array list that we built of all the news data. Your cursor is the specific data that we're trying to work with out of the database. It's that interface file that goes from, okay, I have a database over here, and I need to read from it, and the cursor's what goes there returns it or adds to it. The cursor's the in-between, the middleman, the UPS delivery between Amazon and your house, or, you know, whatever. They deliver, they also return, swap, you know, all those sorts of things. It's that intermediary step is the cursor. So to do this with Recycler, I basically have to, you take your cursor adapter class, you extend your Recycler view just like you would for a list view, because it has to extend something to put the data into. And that's essentially what this cursor adapter is doing, is it's taking the data from the database and saying, okay, now I have this info, what am I supposed to do with it? So your cursor adapter extends whatever list or view that you're going to put it in, and since I'm doing Recycler, that's where it goes. So I have a few fields at the top. So I have a cursor adapter, which is, it's a way to read the cursor itself. So instead of just passing in a cursor of data, I pass in the cursor adapter, which takes the data from the cursor and the context and can apply it that way. Need to pass in my context because I need to know which activity I'm going to, from, all those sorts of things. The on-click interface, so since I'm using a recycler view, recycler does not return the ID of the item that's being selected. It returns a position, but that position is within the recycler view itself. If you think of it, what's the best way to do this? If you think of it this way, with a recycler, so let's say that this red box is my activity, right? And then this purple is my item that's being repeated. So just like a list view, this item gets repeated down the page. Okay. Now what list view does is it populates the entire list ad nauseum, just repeats all the way down. It just keeps going and going and going. It's the little Energizer bunny of data. So even though it might be off screen, the list view data is created, and that ID is kind of a static view. So I may have dozens of items, some are off the screen, some are on the screen. So what a list view does is it says this is one yeah, there we go. So, you know, there's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on, right? What Recycler does is it doesn't care about what's the first item and what's the last item. What it cares about is this is the first item on the screen. There's the second, the third, the fourth. So these are the views that are currently being displayed. That's what Recycler cares about. So I could have 5 items, I could have 500 items off the screen above what's being viewed on my activity. But Recycler, the position is what position is the item that you clicked on in the viewable screen. So Recycler, since Recycler doesn't return the actual ID of being selected, you'll have to do some tweaking to make that happen, which is where these strings and the static details come in, because I need to know what the row ID is, and I need to know what the quantity are for effect of doing the addition. You have the plus and minus, but also the selling on the catalog, all those sorts of things. So those are the sort of details that you have to be able to pass that data through, and the more you play with kind of stepping out of your comfort zone. This was the dumbest choice I ever made, really, to implement Recycler View without really knowing what I was doing. But it made the whole process of understanding what Recycler View does a lot more concrete in my head of really understanding what it does. So if we keep coming through, so my constructor, so you have to have a constructor when you're doing a class like this. I pass in the context, I pass in the cursor, which is the data from the database, and I pass in my on-click interface. And we'll get into that in a second. So you need to take the contextual, what's being passed in from your constructor, just like we do when we build a custom object. We did that in the news app. You do that in here as well. You create an item ID essentially that says this in relation to this class is equal to this data that's passed in. So my context, which I defined here in relations to my adapter, is equal to the context that I pass in from my constructor, which is called from a different class. Same thing with my click interface, and then this, my cursor adapter, which is where the cursor comes in. So it's a default Android class. This isn't custom. The cursor adapter takes in context, it takes in the cursor data, and flags are always 0. I don't know why, it just is. So what this does is it allows me to kind of assign the basic new view and bind view, which are standard for list view implementations of a cursor adapter type function. So new view takes the context, it takes your cursor and the parent view, and you return the layout inflator. So it's inflating a brand new view. It's basically saying, oh, I have more data. Let's drop in a new view for every return in that cursor. So then with the bind view, this is where you assign all the values that you're getting. So you create your view, the context, the cursor, and so like my relative layout, which is just my kind of my outline border. So I have a cell. So this is the specific view for my repeated item. So this is what you'll notice, material button. That's one of the implementations that comes with the Google Material theme. And that's my cell button. So system details, that's the text that says what gaming system it is. The item detail is the name of the item. Let's see. Yeah. So that's this view. And change my theme. There we go. So this is my item view. So as you can see, it's just, so the name, suggested price, that value, the system, just a layout, my sell item button, what I have on hand, and then the quantity on hand. And that's what you saw in the screen when I was running it earlier. But this is just like you would link all of your pieces in an adapter like you do with a list view. Same concept. This is how I had to cheat and pass through the row item for the recycler. What gets a lot of students that I've noticed so far is trying to hook up the sell button. This is one of the harder concepts, is getting the sell button from the catalog to actually update the correct view field. So in a recycler, this is kind of how I cheated. I created a text view and set it equal to the current ID. Now, if I go and I look for this view, should be towards the bottom if I remember right. Yeah. So in this relative layout, I have the system details. So I also have the current ID, but I set the visibility to invisible, so it doesn't show up. So it literally will never show on the screen. Why would you do that, you might ask? Because why would you specifically declare a view to be invisible? And I do that because what I need to do further down here, so this is where I'm getting the details from the cursor. So my item value, so this is the name of the game. So I'm getting the string of the cursor with the column name as game. I just turn it to uppercase, and then I set the text of the item detail to that string value. Same with quantity, same with price, current row value. So, excuse me. So I need to get the base column ID of my database. So in your database, so what you noticed in my view is, so as I add a game, add another game, whatever, I'm adding to my database. So this, let's see, so item belongs to 34. So that is item 34 in my database. 35. Okay, so this item is 35. Now, if I delete all the games in my database, I'm going to delete them, and I'm going to add another dummy game just because. If I sell it, it's 36. So I have no data on my screen. Technically, my database is empty, right? It's not, because base column ID is an auto incremental resource. So it consistently increases every time a new item is added. It can never reuse an old number. So if it can't reuse an old number, if I can't get the row ID, which is one of the things that a list view returns, is the row ID, because you can assign that the row ID to equal the database ID, and then it kind of links it up, and it makes it a lot easier because the recycler doesn't return that. It made it a lot more difficult to get that. So what I had to do is set the row ID, so the current row, that invisible text view, I set the text to the string value of the ID. And then I created string values. Essentially, I probably could have bypassed this step of creating it to the row, but when I did it, I was kind of playing with it to try and figure out if I could pull that text from the other view, and it just didn't work out very well. So I created the row ID, the string value, and then I pass it as a tag that's assigned to this current row ID. So that's the static up here at the top, which is equal to r.id.current ID, and current quantity is r.id.item quantity view. And you'll notice that this is the same name that I give to my text view for quantity, and this is the same ID that I give to my current row. So because I'm setting a tag to the view is this specific item, this one item in the recycler, I can then pass that data along as a tag. And in my other activity, I can view the tag, return the tag based off of that static value, that key. This is a key pairing. So just like when you're parsing JSON data, you have your key value, so your results, that's your array listing, that's your key, and then the value assigned to it is the array of data. So I'm using a key value pair to set this tag. And then I set an on-click listener. This is where my custom clicks come in, because I have both the long click and you have the sell button click. Now, one way you can get around doing something like this is in your XML for your recycler. So where you have this button, you can add Android focusable equals false. So setting this to false allows, so anytime there's any sort of a click interface, so if you're clicking on something on the screen, it asks, okay, so based on where you click on the screen, in relation to what's on the screen, is there something here that can be clicked? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. does this interface have a click functionality? Yes or no? Okay. Now, if it doesn't, let's go down. Let's go to the next view, because everything, remember, is layered. Even though you don't visually see something there, it says, okay, what's next? Okay, what's next? Okay, what's next? By setting focusable to false, it stops. So if I click on that cell item with focusable equals false, it stops the interface, regardless of there being something behind it. So if I don't have that set as false, I can't ever click on the cell button. I can either just do cell, but I can't edit, or vice versa, depending on kind of how the layout is tweaked. And that's what stops a lot of people when they're trying to figure out this cell button. Is it's usually just that they need this Android focusable false. So I bypass that by doing a long click and just a single item click. So I'm setting a long click, and I'm passing through the view and also the integer value of the current row. Same thing with the single click. I'm taking the view, passing in the integer of the current row, and within it, I'm also getting the quantity of it. So because this is my cell button, I can click the cell button, and then that then asks what the values are, and kind of goes through some of these details. So it passes the values back. So when you have a cell, I need to get the value in that field so that when I click it, it can decrease the value. And if we look at my catalog activity, let's see where this is. Okay, so here's my inventory cursor adapter. So I'm passing in my context that takes this activity. I'm giving the cursor, which I get here, which is the query of my data, so my projection. So it looks at all the details. And then I have my on-click interface, which then I can override here because I created a custom interface. So my single item click, I get a view, position, and quantity. And then I create just the basic content values. I create the URI for the current game that's being edited. And then I pass that through with the appended ID of my URI and the position. So the position that you notice is this first integer that's returned on an on-item click. So on my on-item click, I'm passing through the current row and the quantity. This is how I cheat the system, and I get the current row. That's what tells me which item in the database needs to be updated. Without that, it just takes the position in the recycler. Remember this view. So I may be clicking on this, which is technically item 6. It's the first in my recycler. So that's why getting the current row, the base ID, is important. Let's see. Yeah. So then this is where I do my check for my quantity. So if the quantity is equal to 0, I get my message for that you can't sell what you don't have. And then if my quantity is equal to 0, then I do I want to subtract. It can give me my snack bar message, and then it just updates the display. So then that comes into my content resolver where I update, and then every time it always calls for the display database details. That's why when you're looking here and I add an item, it refreshes the view every time. And it just kind of gives that animation effect for the views. Other than that, I mean, that's kind of really the bulk of what it is. You know, you have your shared preferences, which isn't necessary, but I just do that. Again, layout animation, my fab design, so the floating action button, and then my menu, deleting the inventory, all these sorts of things. So then this is my dummy data. So, you know, these are the list of the array of game names that can be there, the array of prices, and then the array of systems. And then here's all my random generators that basically picks a number between 1 and 12 and then puts that in. So, you know, it takes, so my game price, it takes the random generated from selection 3, so it'll pull in one of these values and drop it in there, and then again it updates the display details, notifies changes, all those sorts of things. So I guess at this point, does anyone have any questions? I mean, about the project, about anything in general? You're more than welcome to type. If you are on audio, you can just ask those questions. I'm just going to drink from my Deadpool mug for a while. Oh, that's cold coffee. Let's see.
I have a question, but it's not related to Project 9, so I want to first see
what else can I show you. Get an idea of what to expect. Probably I'm not the best idea of what to expect. I went way overboard on designing this. There are much simpler ways to do what I did. I would really recommend sticking with the default list view for this and not trying to do recycle. And yep, you can ask your question in a second, John. Yeah, if you stick with the list view, it's going to take you real far. It'll be much better, big picture, long term, just going in with the list view. Like I said, it's that ID value will be easier to get because it's already returned in the list view, because it creates the whole list every time, and it returns the right data. Go ahead with a question on Project 7.
Can you hear me? Oh.
I don't know why I'm still drinking this cold coffee. Man.
Hello?
Let's see. Let me check my sound a second. Oh, like I said, my sound gets weird from time to time. Try again.
Hello? Hello?
Man. That's not cool. Da, 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 da. I still got nothing. Try again now. I think I got it.
Hello?
Ah, there you are.
It's going to be kind of hard to explain. I actually sent in the Slack channel yesterday because
Okay.
it's like, I don't know what's wrong with my code. It just, so Project 7 is the news app.
Yes.
It has you have to add the preferences. And I added it.
Yeah,
But
I
then
think
it says
I
no
think
news.
I saw that code. I remember looking at that. Da, da, da. Let's see. Yeah, because I think you posted it in office hours and then in one of
Yeah.
the channels. Yeah, that's right. Let's see. Okay.
I made a couple more commits to it, so it's probably out of date now. I mean, it's a little messed up. Everything's messed up on my project. So let me send you the most recent. I mean, I'll go back to that commit.
Okay.
All right. Send it. Where should I send it? Here or in the?
Yeah, you can drop it here.
Okay. Wait. Oops.
Okay, give me a second. Let me clone it. Let's see.
Actually, I'm not sure it's the right one anymore. Everything is kind of.
No, it's okay. It'll still give me an idea. So I'm looking at.
Yeah, because I started to make two versions, and that's where things got really messed up. But because one version didn't work, so I made a second version. That didn't work, and now I'm confused on my GitHub which one is which anymore.
Let's see. Okay, so So what your reviewer said was preferences. As preferences are changed, the app should update accordingly to the new changes, but still it shows the same news items. Okay.
Yeah, so I did add more preferences. I was able to do that.
Okay.
Kind of broke everything.
That's okay. It's the best way to learn. I'm serious. I have 30 repositories in my GitHub, and there are probably 6 or 7 of them that are just duplicates of the same code that I broke.
Yeah.
Couldn't figure out how to do it, so I just recreated a new one. Because then I could go back and look at the one and just have both of them open on my screen. And so let's see what's going on here. It's not downloading, but I can still look at the Java. Okay, so menus activity on the okay. So okay. Okay, yeah, I don't think this is the one that has your preferences in it because you're just returning just the default request. So let me do this a second. As you can see, I look at lots of code. I think this is mine. Okay, so in your main activity, man, now you got me all confused. I don't even think I'm opening the right one. Yeah, that doesn't have my settings. That's the wrong one. Okay, I'm going to go about this a different way since I know where it is out here. I'm going to take a look. And my sports news. Okay, so when you're adding preferences where you want to have your preferences assigned, should be, if I'm remembering right, yeah, here in the onCreate loader. So what I have is, so you want your shared preferences, you want to get your default preferences based on the context, and then you want to get your strings, which I vaguely remember looking at in your code when I saw this when I saw your message pop up last night, but I was just looking at it on my phone, so I couldn't actually reproduce anything. And we're running out of time for the the hour. I'm going to keep looking at your code once we're done here, and I'll touch base with you in Slack and just kind of go through some of that stuff once I get it pulled up and loaded on my project. But really the things that I've noticed when I'm debugging other people is that often it comes down to this area here where you're getting the shared preferences and you're getting the strings that's assigned to it. You know, so like for mine, I have preferences that you can define a start date and an end date. So you want to look at just news in this time period. And I couldn't get mine to work for the longest time until I realized that I had, instead of the date key, I had used just, you know, string start date. That was a valid string reference in my string resources, and that stopped. It didn't break anything because it's a valid string, so I wasn't getting an error on it, but it wasn't actually updating into the details because it didn't know what that shared preference was. That'd be the first thing that I'm probably going to look at, is just double check the strings, because this is kind of the naming function, is make it obvious that this is the key, this is the default, you know, this is the you know, the array list, those sorts of things tend to be what stop others up. And it could easily just be something like that, where your shared preference isn't updating because the string reference doesn't match what it should. I don't want to put money on that just because I'm not sure without really getting it up there, but that's my normal, that would be my first guess, is that it's something in there. The other thing that could be the potential is appending the right query parameter and making sure that it matches. So, you know, like from dash date is different than from underscore date, and whatever the API requests. So if it needs a dash, if it needs an underscore, it is specific. So that'd be the other thing that I'll probably give a look at. Those would be the first places that I would look, is just double check your strings and then open up the API query, what you think it should be in your browser, you know, and just make sure that you get valid data here, because it'll tell you if you don't have data. Test the raw. Yeah, good job, Chris. You know, you want to test that in here just to double check that all of that data does actually show up. So you'll see my from dash date. So if I change that to an underscore, it still pulls data, but it's not looking at that parameter, because the Guardian API doesn't care if you have extra data in there. It just reads, okay, is this something that I know what it is, yes or no? If yes, use it. If no, just ignore it. It's extra data. Whereas like when you get into the advanced degree and you're using an API from the movie database here, so like you have this string, if any of these characters are wrong, it's not going to give you any data. There we go. So like this API request will return one thing, whereas, you know, if I have extra characters in here, you know, even if it looks like it should be a valid, it's going to give me an error message and not return anything. That's the one thing that the Guardian API doesn't take into account for, is bad data. They want to return the data regardless. It just may be wrong. So that would be the other thing, is just so when you go into your code and you're looking at it in this section down here in the loader, I would return a log message, do, log.e, and then whatever this URI builder that you're putting together to a string, pass that back to your log messages, and then try that in your browser. That might point you in the right direction as to what's actually going on and why it's not taking that data. And you can look at the appended query. So I hate to cut it short, but we did hit the 1 hour mark. So if anyone else has any questions, anything, just shoot me a message. Online, I'm usually available for stuff like that. I hope some of this was helpful looking forward as you kind of get into Project 9 and as we start to wrap up the course. We got 5 weeks until the end. We're getting there. So again, I'll see you on the other side. Thanks.
Thank you.